I didn't immediately realize something was wrong with me. It started after that trip to Texas, when I wandered onto the grounds of the abandoned psychiatric hospital in Westlake, a small town about an hour's drive from San Antonio. I was just looking for interesting places to take photos, nothing serious. The internet was flooded with lists of 10 most haunted buildings in America, and the Westlake Hospital was one of them. I thought, why not? It was early October. The sun wasn't blazing anymore, and I wanted something unusual. The hospital had been closed since the early 80s. The official reason was lack of funding and stricter care standards, but I found other versions online. Missing patients, unexplained deaths, staff members who quit after night shifts without explanation. Typical urban legends, of course. I didn't believe in ghosts or curses. I believed in photo filters and interesting shots. The building stood on the outskirts, almost in the woods. The road to it was more like an abandoned dirt path. I was driving a rental car, and the GPS first went haywire, then found its way again. When I saw the building, a strange chill ran down my spine. It was massive, 3 stories high, made of red brick, with broken windows, a collapsed roof, and a faded sign. Only the letters Westlake remained. The windows on the first floor were boarded up, but someone had made a hole in one of them long ago. Inside it smelled of dust, rotting wood, rust, and something else. Pungent, like old bleach. The flashlight revealed crumbling walls, scribbled messages, old gurneys, and even a chair used for restraining patients. Everything was covered in mold and time. The deeper I went, the stranger the feeling became. It was as though the building was waiting. It was eerily quiet. I took a few pictures, walked through the first floor, and found a staircase. It creaked, but held up. The second floor was colder. There, I saw cells, small rooms with metal doors and keyholes. Above the doors were faded plaques with numbers. On one, someone had scratched, "Don't listen." On another, "He left, but he'll come back." I smirked, assuming it was the work of teenagers. I was in the hallway when I first heard the sound. Soft, almost imperceptible, a long groan. My brain immediately started looking for logical explanations. Wind, an old pipe, an animal. But the sound came again, closer, slow, hoarse, not like a person, not like an animal, something in between. I don't know why I followed the sound. Maybe I thought someone was stuck. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I kept moving. The hallway led to the intensive care unit. There, by one of the doors, I saw it. A hand. From the slightly open door, a thin, pale hand was sticking out. Its long fingers were unnaturally stretched. The nails were dirty, brittle. I shone the flashlight at the door. The hand vanished. It seemed to retract back inside. I froze. I felt physically sick. The air felt thicker. I didn't open the door. I turned and ran. Through the hallway, down the stairs, nearly falling. My heart was pounding like crazy. I burst outside. It was starting to get dark. I had to crawl through thorny bushes to get to the car. One of them scratched my arm. I didn't even notice right away. I drove away as soon as I could, but it all started back home. At first, nightmares. The same hallways, the screams, the hand reaching for me. Then, oddities. The windows started fogging up from the inside, even with the windows open. Fingerprints appeared on the bathroom mirror, as if someone was touching the glass from the inside. The lights started flickering, and then the screams. At night I heard them, sometimes from under the floor, sometimes from behind the walls. Once I heard someone whisper my name. When I rushed to turn on the light, it didn't work. A week after the trip, I woke up at 4 in the morning, feeling like I couldn't breathe. I dreamt I was back in that building, in that room, and when I opened my eyes, I saw the hand at the head of my bed. It was hanging in the air. Its fingers were moving. I screamed. The light flashed, and it disappeared. I went to church. I saw a psychologist. I tried to forget. I deleted all the photos, cleared the memory card, but none of it helped. The screams remained. They're not every day. Sometimes I think it's over. Then at 3 in the morning, I hear a moan in my bedroom, or I see a shadow behind me in the mirror, or I wake up feeling like I can't breathe, as if someone's sitting on my chest. And I can't shake the feeling that when I left Westlake, I didn't leave alone. In the small town of Oak Ridge, nestled deep in the heart of New England, the abandoned St. Oak Asylum had been standing vacant for decades. The massive Gothic building, with its towering spires and dark, weather-worn bricks, had always intrigued the locals. But no one had dared to enter its decaying halls in years, not since it was shut down in the 1970s after a series of bizarre and unexplained incidents. One cold autumn evening, a group of college students from the nearby university decided to take on the challenge of exploring the asylum. Among them was Sarah, a curious journalism major who had heard the chilling stories about the asylum from the locals. The rumors were that the asylum's patients had been subjected to cruel and inhumane treatments, and that their spirits still haunted the halls. As the group entered the building through a broken window, the air grew thick with dust and the smell of decay. The peeling wallpaper and rusted medical equipment littering the floors gave the place a sense of abandoned history. But there was something else, something darker that lingered in the air. They didn't know it yet, but St. Oak wasn't just abandoned. It was cursed. Sarah, holding her flashlight, led the way through the crumbling corridors. The other students, Ethan, Mark, and Lily, followed closely behind, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The deeper they went into the asylum, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. A sense of dread weighed heavily on them, but Sarah pushed forward, determined to find out what had really happened here. They found a door marked psychiatric ward, and without hesitation, Sarah opened it. Inside, the walls were lined with rusting metal beds and broken furniture. A large metal cage sat in the center of the room, its purpose unclear. The group stepped inside, their flashlights revealing faded medical charts on the walls and old patient records scattered across the floor. Suddenly, Mark let out a sharp gasp. He pointed to a dark corner of the room. "What's that?" he asked, his voice trembling. The group turned, but there was nothing there, just the shadows. Or so they thought. As they continued to explore, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically, and the sound of faint whispers filled the air. Sarah's heart pounded as she tried to make sense of the strange noises, but they seemed to come from everywhere at once. Panic began to set in when Ethan, who was near the doorway, screamed, "Get out! Something's behind us!" he yelled. The others rushed toward the exit, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Trapped inside, they turned to face the room. At first there was nothing, just shadows dancing on the walls. But then they began to see them, figures standing motionless in the dark corners. The patients, their hollow eyes stared back at the students, their faces twisted in grotesque expressions of anguish. Lily screamed as one of the figures lurched forward, its skeletal hand reaching out. The students scrambled to escape, but the asylum had other plans. The shadows closed in, whispering in unintelligible voices. As Sarah looked back one last time, she saw the figure of a tall man in a white coat, his face obscured by darkness. His eyes burned with an unnatural intensity. "Get out," he whispered, his voice cold and harsh. The door burst open, and the group fled into the night, but the asylum's horrors would never leave them. Sarah would later report on the incident, but when the story hit the newspapers, something strange happened. No one remembered the asylum's location. It had disappeared from all maps, and anyone who tried to find it would only end up lost in the woods, miles away from where it should have been. St. Oak Asylum was gone, but the shadows inside it had found new victims. When I agreed to work with a local film crew, I never imagined it would end with me screaming in the dark underground, bleeding and begging for help. It all started innocently enough. A documentary about urban legends in New Jersey, and one of the episodes was supposed to be about an abandoned hospital. Greenfield State Hospital, which closed in 1993 after a series of scandals. The filming was scheduled for nighttime. The producer, a girl named Kaylee, insisted, "It'll be cooler, darkness, flashlights, spirits of the past." I, as the sound assistant, was supposed to carry equipment and make sure the host's microphone didn't fall off. I didn't argue. At 10:40 p.m., we entered the building. There were 4 of us, me, the host named Dan, Kaylee, and the cameraman, Zach. As soon as we stepped inside, it was clear. The building wasn't welcoming. The door, though slightly ajar, creaked as if it was complaining. Inside there was dust, a damp smell of mold, cracked ceilings. Everything was in a strange, suffocating silence, as if the hospital was holding its breath. We started in the reception area. Kaylee was reading the script about patients who were kept without treatment, about room 6A, where someone supposedly disappeared, and about a doctor who hanged himself in the procedure room. It was eerie, but I wasn't scared yet. Then we found the elevator shaft. There was a legend that during the evacuation, someone locked themselves on the bottom floor, in isolation. They kept violent patients there. Rumors said one never made it out. Zach suddenly said, "There's something down there. Shine the light." We shone the light. A children's shoe lay on the floor. Dan laughed. Someone must have dropped it. A propriedad. But I started feeling uneasy. I noticed that on the wall of the elevator shaft, there were finger marks, as if someone had scraped the concrete, trying to escape. Kaylee, almost crazed with excitement, jumped at the idea. "Let's go down there. There's an iron staircase on the side. This would make for the best footage." I didn't want to, but I couldn't refuse. We went down, and the door closed behind us. A sharp click. Darkness. The microphones crackled. The light flickered. "Kaylee," I called. "Is that you?" I didn't touch anything. Her voice trembled. We tried to open the door. It was locked. The massive metal door wouldn't budge. There was no signal. We were 4 in the basement, in a 30-year-old dead hospital. The basement was a maze. Stone walls, grates, cages, real cages, with beds that had restraints on them. Water dripped from the ceiling. The air was stagnant, damp. We started to panic. Does anyone know how to get out? What about ventilation? We can just wait. Then we heard a sound, a metallic scrape, like someone dragging a chain across the floor. Zach froze. That wasn't us. The light flickered again. A figure flashed behind Kaylee, dark, elongated, with something like a hood. We screamed. Zach ran ahead, and his footsteps quickly faded. We ran after him, but the corridors were strangely altered. There were more turns, more doors. Kaylee stopped, trembling. These aren't the same corridors, I swear. They weren't here before. We found Zach about 10 minutes later. He was sitting in the corner, his hands covered in blood. She grabbed my hand. He whispered. She said silence and squeezed. He showed his palm. There were 6 fingerprints pressed into it. Not 5, 6. Now there were 3 of us left. Dan wanted to break through the ventilation. I held the flashlight, and Kaylee helped. We climbed through the maintenance shaft. It was tight. The hum grew louder. It felt like the whole building was alive, breathing. Metal creaked. Somewhere below, footsteps, slow, scraping. When Dan climbed ahead, he suddenly froze. What is that? What? A face. There's a face. Right in front of me. At that moment, the grate in front of him collapsed, and Dan vanished. He just disappeared. We heard a dull thud. His body had fallen. Kaylee and I almost fell too, but we held on. I don't remember how we made it back to the corridors. Kaylee was crying. I just wanted to get out, at any cost. We found a hole in the wall, a ventilation tunnel, crawled on all fours, in the dark, by ear, and again, a whisper. They stayed. You're with them. Your eyes are ours. Kaylee screamed and disappeared, as if someone dragged her away. She literally vanished into the tunnel. I crawled alone. A faint draft. I made it to the exit. A rusty hatch led to the backyard. I was covered in blood. No camera, alone. 3 weeks have passed now. The police have no records of Kaylee or Dan. The database is empty. Zach is missing. When I returned with the cops, the building was completely demolished. All that remained was a concrete slab. But sometimes, in absolute silence, I hear the 6-fingered tapping on the floor. Pine Hill was once the most renowned psychiatric institution in the state of Georgia. Founded in the 1920s, it was known for its cutting-edge treatments. But what the public didn't know was the dark side of Pine Hill. The facility became infamous after a series of unethical and illegal experiments on patients. In the early 1950s, the institution was shut down after a fire destroyed part of the building. However, it didn't take long for rumors to spread about strange happenings in the abandoned wards. Years later, a local historian named Jack Turner decided to investigate the truth behind Pine Hill. Jack was fascinated by the history of the institution, especially its controversial treatments. In 1982, he gathered a team of researchers, including his friend Anna, a graduate student in psychology, to explore the abandoned halls of Pine Hill. They arrived at the crumbling building one rainy evening, armed with equipment to document any paranormal activity. The main entrance had long since been boarded up, so they entered through a side door that had been broken open. The interior of Pine Hill was a twisted labyrinth of decaying rooms and long-forgotten medical equipment. The air was thick with mold, and the walls seemed to whisper with each gust of wind. Anna shivered as they moved deeper into the building. "This place gives me the creeps," she said, her voice echoing through the empty halls. "Keep it together. Jack replied. "We're here to uncover the truth." They began exploring the old wards, taking photographs and notes. The further they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. At one point, they found an old operating theater. The seats were covered in dust, and the surgical tools were rusted and abandoned. But it was what they found on the operating table that made Jack's stomach turn. It was a collection of old patient records, scattered across the table as though someone had been rifling through them recently. One name stood out to Jack: Dr. Howard Graves, the head psychiatrist who had been rumored to be involved in the illegal experiments. The records were dated from the 1940s, and the treatments described within them were chilling. As Jack flipped through the pages, he came across a set of photographs showing patients being subjected to a procedure known as the quiet mind. The patients' faces were blank, their eyes wide open and staring. The procedure was said to involve isolating the patients in sensory deprivation chambers, attempting to silence their thoughts. The photos showed patients in various states of distress, their bodies contorted in unnatural ways. But what caught Jack's attention was a single photograph that showed a figure standing behind one of the patients, Dr. Graves. But it wasn't just the figure of Dr. Graves that made Jack freeze. It was the face of the patient in the photograph. The eyes were wide open, but there was something more, something alive in those eyes. The patient wasn't just staring, they were watching. A sudden noise from behind them broke the silence. Anna turned to see a shadow dart across the hall. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Before Jack could answer, the temperature in the room plummeted. They turned to see a figure standing in the doorway, just beyond the reach of their flashlights. It was a man, dressed in an old, tattered hospital gown, his face obscured by shadows. "Who are you?" Jack called out, his voice filled with dread. The figure stepped closer, revealing a face twisted in agony, its eyes hollow and unblinking. "Help me," the figure rasped, its voice a ghastly whisper. Anna screamed and backed away, but Jack stood frozen, his heart racing. The figure reached out a skeletal hand, its fingers curling as if to grasp him. Suddenly, the entire building seemed to tremble, and the lights flickered. The walls began to close in on them, and a cacophony of whispers filled the air. The voices of the patients, those who had been subjected to Dr. Graves's experiments, echoed through the halls. In a panic, Jack grabbed Anna's hand, and they ran down the hallway, the ghostly figure following them, its footsteps growing louder with each passing second. They reached the front door, but it was locked. Behind them, the figure let out a blood-curdling scream, and the entire building seemed to groan in response. Jack and Anna finally forced open the door and fled into the night, but the haunting faces of the patients would haunt them forever. When they returned to town, they tried to report their findings. But when they returned to the site the next morning, Pine Hill had vanished. The building was gone, as if it had never existed. All that remained was an empty field, the memories of those trapped inside it now forgotten by the world.